There've just been enough signs, which I think are just making Republicans and the base jittery, and therefore power. It does feel as though trying to fix votes in Indiana in terms of their seats that we had recently that didn't go through. Republicans are not as subservient to Donald Trump as they were a couple of months ago.
And we're joined by Katy, Washington editor of the Times from the other side in DC. Hi to you, Katy.
Hello.
Lovely to have you here. I mean, there's so much stuff, so much hard news, gossip to catch up on. Naturally, I'm going to start off with the gossip, which is the chief of staff to the president, Susie Wiles, in this interview, or was it a series of interviews put together in a single piece in the Vanity Fair magazine, in which she just seems to be saying so much of the quiet stuff out loud. Can you just get us up to speed with that?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Susie Wiles has been described by Donald Trump as the most powerful woman in the world. She's certainly the most powerful advisor in the White House in the Trump administration, and she calls the shots. She's his chief of staff. Now, she doesn't do too much publicity. She's done occasional broadcast interviews. She has sat down for 11 different conversations with Vanity Fair over the past year or so. And they have launched, 2 essay-length articles with these in. And immediately when it dropped, people started paying a lot of attention to it because there's very eye-catching phrases. So she describes Donald Trump, for example, of having the personality of an alcoholic. Now, the context here, she's talking about her father was an alcoholic. She's talking about how she knows, they're very intense and so forth. But that phrase is obviously attracting a lot of attention. J.D. Vance, she talks about being a conspiracy theorist for 10 years. Again, the context is her trying to give him a compliment on the Epstein files. And then on Elon Musk, I think it's probably the next headline grabber. She is asked by the author about Elon Musk, various tweets. One, suggesting that dictators weren't the problem. It was public service workers. And she's just he was probably microdosing, talking about how the fact he's talked in the past about using ketamine. Yeah. Now, this starts to obviously send shockwaves across DC and beyond. And then Susie Wiles has since hit back, saying that, that her comments were not taken in good faith. They've been taken out of context. And you now have the administration turning on Vanity Fair. But the slight problem is Vanity Fair has done this photo shoot where not just Susie Wiles, but Caroline Leavitt, Stephen Miller, they're all, dressed up very glamorously to go along with this. So I think some people are asking, well, now you say this publication is completely off, but why did the White House decide to go for this in the first place?
Yeah, tell me, okay, what's your reading into all of this? She says it's a lot of comments taken out of context. She says it's a hit job by Vanity Fair. Doesn't seem to be disputing the quotes, the stuff which is in quote marks, which he clearly, unless it's all entirely a lie by Vanity Fair. These are accurate bits of what she said. How do you read that? I mean, Susie Wiles, as far as I'm aware, is one of the people that Donald Trump trusts most in the world. She's said to be, isn't she, one of the people that can actually tell him what's what, can actually put him up. She says in the article she gave him various pieces of advice which he just chose to ignore, but she was still someone who was capable of giving that kind of advice and not being kicked out of the room. And then you see this stuff. What's going on? Is this just that none of the rules apply in the White House, none of the recognisable rules of doing politics, including the chief of staff dropping bombs on everyone of every significance around the administration?
Yeah, I think, as you say, it doesn't feel as though they're really questioning whether the quotes are correct. It's more they're going around the context. However, you did have, for example, the quote about microdosing. The New York Times wrote that Susie Wiles was saying that she didn't say that. Then, of course, the author actually played the tape back to the New York Times.
Right, so she's got the whole tape.
Yep, and they played that specific bit and said, actually, that is what the New York Times are saying. They've heard it, and that's what she said. Now, so it's all about the context. I think that what is interesting here is Susie Wiles has been largely credited with one of the reasons that the second-term Trump administration has been more functional than the first term. If you think about the first term, there was a mass exodus. There were lots of personality politics, people coming and going. You can not like the policies. You can like the policies of this administration. They have been more effective compared to the first time I get things done. And that's because the people say Susie Wiles is a cool head. And clearly, the fact that you had members of the administration like Marco Rubio and others giving on-the-record quotes for this feature, I think they thought it was a chance to really see their colleague who they admire's name in lights. It has not worked out like that. And now you do have some figures in Maga saying, hang on a minute, we never liked Vanity Fair. We do think they're this evil, old school legacy media. But we would never have said you should do 11 interviews with them. So I think this is one where obviously lots of people look on and say an interview is an interview, but also I think with parts of the base, is it an unforced error to have decided to do this, if that makes sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, there are so many big things that I'd love to, and I will get through a couple of them in the time that we've got. I mean, big politics, on the economy, on trade. We've been covering the story of the big tech deal, which has suddenly stalled between America and the United Kingdom today. But because this is the last hour of the show, and because we like a bit of gossip, I'm going to stay with, the personality politics for a moment. That's not to say that it's not serious, because the president's Truth Social post about the killing of Rob Reiner and his wife by his son. I mean, an awful story. And we all know now what President Trump said, just attributing the whole awful tragedy to Trump derangement syndrome. And I clearly get, watching the coverage from this side of the Atlantic, Katy, that caused a lot of waves in Washington too, and not just on the other side of the aisle, on the red side too.
No, completely. There are many Republicans who are very unhappy that Donald Trump decided to do a Truth Social post after a man has been brutally murdered, and is talking about Trump derangement syndrome. I think to be honest, it was just one of those moments where people just are perplexed and slightly horrified. But as you say, it's not just the Democrats. Some Republicans have come out publicly to say that this is something he shouldn't have done.
Marjorie Taylor Greene among them.
Exactly. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene is now quite a vocal critic of Trump.
Yeah.
But I think that behind the scenes, I think people are looking at and saying, why didn't someone stop him from sending that True Social post? So I think there is private uncomfortableness from those close to, those in the administration, as well as those going out on the offensive. And it just feels very bad taste.
Right. Anyway, Joe and Matt are both here. Joe.
A very, very quick story just to lead into this is that when I was running Boris Johnson's mayoral campaign PR, we had an issue, we thought, with women of a certain age, and we decided that it would be a good idea to do an interview with Marie Claire magazine, and that ended incredibly badly because one Janet Street Porter interviewed Boris without anybody present, and the upshot of what she took from the conversation was very, very unhelpful and ended up as a front page story at the time about Boris and potential drug use, which was never obviously part of our strategy. So I'm interested as to the strategy behind the engagement with Vanity Fair, because there's obviously something they've considered in this wouldn't have just been a Susie sort of vanity piece, we hope. There must have been 11 interviews is surely an investment of time that they are trying to get something across about the administration in that particular publication, because they're going after, they feel they've got a weakness with a particular group of the population. And I wonder, Katy, if you've got a view, because maybe you've sort of seen polling or looking at other media they're engaging in, because I know when we did it, it was because of very specific polling we were looking at where we were losing support or we didn't have the support during an election campaign. It just makes me wonder if there's a particular need that they felt they had, and that's why they were going in that direction.
It's an interesting one, because I think that on paper, the Vanity Fair audience is almost everything that the Make America Great Again movement would say they were against. Shiny Hollywood society. But there is something, so I don't know, perhaps it's more of a female voter. We know, for example, at the last election, they focused heavily on men and there were concerns they weren't reaching out to enough women. But I do wonder if it's also something slightly else, which is you think about, Donald Trump and his team rail against kind of legacy media, the mainstream. They want to say drain the swamp, but they also do like it when he's Time Person of the Year. He gave an interview to Politico, hadn't given one in 5 years.
Yeah.
After Politico named him the most influential figure in Europe, and I think there's almost something where they're critical, but to have that almost acknowledgement from these certain places when they think things are going up there, I think they are a little bit drawn to that sometimes.
Yes. I mean, I get that theory. I mean, I just get in pursuit of that theory. You then give 11 interviews and talk about Donald Trump's resemblance to the ways of an alcoholic, and Elon Musk being a whatever that phrase was, a weird duck or whatever it was, and all of the rest of it. And Pam Bondi, she whiffed up over the Epstein files. It's not the way to exploit that access in the best possible way. It's an absolute collapse of nous. Seems inexplicable.
But how does the chief of staff to the President of the United States have time to give 11 interviews? They won't have been 5 minutes. They'll have been probably at least an hour.
Yeah.
Like, that's a significant amount of time. And it is, I mean, when have you ever, I can't think of a chief of staff, a serving chief of staff that has undertaken that sort of engagement. It's, you'd have thought Vanity Fair would be a Melania thing. You wouldn't have expected it to be her. It seems like a really curious choice.
But that's why I think your explanation makes perfect sense of why they might have done it. I can't help but think she's freewheeling. Or something. Why? None of this makes sense.
What does freewheeling mean in this context?
Well, she's done it on her own accord.
But why?
Well, exactly. That's my question.
Maybe she's had enough. Maybe she wants out. But
Because
this
I
hasn't
think-
gone very well for her.
And Katy might have views on this. He's finished, really. He's done. Because his numbers are in the toilet when it comes from anything to the economy. He's called inaffordability a Democrat hoax. Even on immigration, people are turning against him, despite the low numbers coming in. He's going to be a lame duck president at some point, and I can't help but feel that's less than 12 months now with how the midterms are going to look. How long do you think, Katy, it's going to be until you see real MAGA loyalists? We've seen, Marjorie Taylor Greene certainly could be described as that, but J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, and those with one eye on 2028, real jostling and beginning to critique him possibly more openly than maybe what they're thinking behind the scenes at the moment.
Yeah, well, I first off say what's so strange about this interview and what's happened is you would say completely, is it freewheeling? Because logically, what's behind it? And Joe makes a great point. There must be some logic to it, but it can't be freewheeling because you have a photo shoot which has, about 7 senior members of the administration looking very dapper in suits posing. You have on the record interviews from Marco Rubio and others to say how great Susie Wiles is. So I think, and also Susie Wiles, from those who know her well, she isn't known for having a big ego. She really isn't. That's why it's such a strange scenario we're now in. Yeah. She's known as his low ego and keeps him going behind the scenes. So I don't know if it's a commie tragedy of errors, but this is obviously a decision by the administration. And then I just say briefly on the lame duck point. I mean, I think we have seen in the past month that you can feel it here. I think you can see it from afar. There's just been a shift ever since those elections where the Democrats triumphed, not just in New York, also in Virginia, with very different candidates, but all on cost of living. And I think since then, you had a Democrat winning in Miami last week. There've just been enough signs, which I think are just making Republicans and the base jittery. And therefore, power, it does feel as though, trying to fix votes in Indiana in terms of their seats that we had recently, that didn't go through. Republicans are not as subservient to Donald Trump as they were a couple of months ago. Yeah. And now he could get it back, but you are seeing the beginning signs of this.
No, I mean, I don't know if it's because President Trump is aware of the looming possibility of lame duck status, or because he's completely oblivious to it. But just as you're speaking there, it's been published. The president has gone on Truth Social and announced that he's going to be giving an address to the nation tomorrow, live on TV, live from the White House. And he says the best is yet to come. It's going to be an upbeat volley from President Trump, presumably from the Oval Office. And we just shared the news. The President of the United States has announced on social media that he's going to be giving a live address to the United States and the world, I suppose, tomorrow on TV from the White House. He said the best is yet to come, so it sounds like an upbeat exercise. At this moment, I guess we can only guess, and your guesses are better than most people on this. How do you think you might use this thing, Katy?
Well, we know, obviously, you have Ukraine talks ongoing. We know that we have the release of the Epstein files by Friday. So I don't think it's a great surprise that as he comes under pressure, he might want to put out a positive message. And perhaps this is going to be him telling us how great it's got all going, or perhaps it's going to get to that affordability issue, which J.D. Vance has been speaking on today. So it might be economic news. I think that's the area where they feel they're on the back foot at the moment. But I think a big shiny announcement from Donald Trump this week, there is a reason he might want to do that, because we know there's potentially some quite tricky news coming this week, come Friday, with the Epstein files.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I'd have thought to try and tell a positive story on the economy. That's not that is especially easy. I mean, Katy and guys. The president keeps on talking about concerns about the rising cost of living. Inflation is around, I think, 3% now, which is more or less where it was when he came in. And the president insists that it's going down, and insists, rather bizarrely, that the affordability notion is a hoax. I don't even know what that means. It seems certainly a concern, and the opinion polls say the same sort of thing. And also, Katy, when it comes to the the state of the economy when it comes to tariffs. And the president was, in the last 48 hours or so, talking about his tariff regime bringing in, what was it, between 18 and $21 trillion, which, again, is a money that makes an amount of money, a number, that makes literally no sense from any angle. Maybe we're going to get more of that, Katy.
And of course, the question on tariffs, is who is paying the price of tariffs? You can say foreign countries are, but often the consumer, and that could be American consumers. And those who argue for tariffs say it's a long form rebalancing of the US economy. But they themselves will admit that, there are losers in that time. And they can be here in America, where I'm speaking to you from. I think on the economy, it's funny. Donald Trump and his team so successfully at the last election had these attacks on Joe Biden that he said out of touch on the economy. He kept saying the economy was in good condition and pointing to graphs, but ultimately voters didn't feel it. And it does feel a little bit at the moment that Trump is now falling into that trap of, talking about, positive things, but actually it's jarring with the public. And the problem is, as soon as you get to that place where people feel as though they're struggling to make ends meet, all of a sudden some of the other things that Trump likes to do, such as say build a ballroom, have a great Gatsby party, it starts to be easier to weaponize if people are feeling as though the president's not focusing enough on their priorities.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? If it was Ukraine, it would have to be something entirely unexpected, wouldn't it? Such as, I've been on the phone with Vladimir Putin for all we know, probably for the fifth time that day. And after the last conversation, President Putin had said, he's ready now to come to the negotiating table. Well, that really would be a coup and worthy of a live address from the Oval Office. But, I mean, that would be so out of the blue and so against, as they say in sport, the run of play, Katy.
Yeah, and also we've been down this path so many times now where you're hearing there's a breakthrough on Ukraine, and then, there's positive noise on one side, and then after a day or two, an attempt to, it peters out, and we realize the two sides are quite far apart. So I think that would be a really hard thing. Now, we have had positive noises this week, but it would certainly be, you wouldn't want to do one of these big announcements unless you had everything broken. And then you would start to think, well, things would start leaking from, the various sides at this point. So it seems less likely, but we can live in hope.
We can live in hope, Joe.
That was my thought, was that my first thought was, it must be Ukraine related. But then I think you're absolutely right about the potential of leaking. But also it feels to me that it's either Trump misjudging things and then doing a sort of tomorrow I'm going to tell you. Given the time difference, it would make sense to do something immediately and sort of nail it publicly to say if it was that. So it does make you wonder if he's exactly. So it does sort of point more towards something being manufactured as a sort of typical Trump style. I'm going to talk it up for nearly 24 hours before it happens, and then when it happens, everyone goes, "Oh, was that it?" Which does feel more in keeping with Trump, that he's going to try and sort of, almost encourage everyone to be around their television sets, because it's going to be a big address from him. Yeah. But then will it say anything at all? It doesn't feel particularly likely. Yeah, Matt.
If I was to make a prediction, it will be rambling, incoherent. It probably will be on the economy. Whether he's managed to find some money for these Trump checks, the tariff checks that he was wanting to send out every person. He loved the idea of the COVID checks, and whether that'll be it. It will largely be, you've never had it so good. We're going to see the best times yet, and that will be it. It will be, I think, quite underwhelming. I hope I'm wrong, and who knows? He's got a deal, but I think it'll be little to nothing, really.
Yeah, it'll be something for us all to watch. I mean, on President Katy, what sort of time of the day does the president do an address like this?
I think the suggestion is it's going to be 9 p.m. tomorrow our time, evening. But he can really go in different directions. The evening addresses tend to have a bit more of a sense of grandeur to them, the statement to the nation type thing. Yeah. But also we've had in the past, he is the type of president where at the very last minute you're invited to a press briefing at the White House, and then on Friday morning you just wake up and in an hour's time he's in the press briefing room. So he's also quite sporadic.